I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Area for September the 15th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the let's express your mind alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we have 3 systems active in the Atlantic today, 3 tropical cyclones at that, still very active here in peak season. We have Hurricane Lee. This is continuing to push northward and will be bringing impacts starting tonight to Atlantic Canada and the northeastern United States. We'll be going into detail on the impacts on that in just a moment. We have Tropical Storm Margot now here southwest of the Azores. This system is going to continue meandering around this general region over the next week, and it could potentially come back towards the Azores as a non-tropical cyclone, and that could bring some increased wind impacts as the system does so. But there is some uncertainty on exactly how far east or west it gets, as it is forecast to sort of do a wide loop, where some models actually have it coming south of the Azores again on some of their runs, so we'll have to watch that over the coming days. We also have newly formed Tropical Depression 15. This system is forecast to track northwest and could become a major hurricane, yes, another one, as it comes into the central Atlantic and interest in Bermuda. Need to pay close attention to the storm, and I'll be going into detail on that in after we go through Lee. But I'll leave timestamps for Lee's stuff and then 15's stuff. But we're first going to talk about Hurricane Lee. This is the close-up visible loop. You can see the storm is now past Bermuda. The tropical storm force winds, for the most part, have left the island. So hopefully the impacts turn out not to be as bad as tropical storms can be. But the system is now well on its way to Atlantic Canada, and now really the forecasting phase of this in terms of track is really done. We're pretty much set in stone on this track. We're pretty certain that the system is going to come, maybe hook a little bit northwest into the very cold waters here near Nova Scotia, and likely make a landfall somewhere near western Nova Scotia. That seems to be the most likely scenario here that's going to play out. Now, the system has not passed the Gulf Stream yet. It will soon. The Gulf Stream runs sort of like this, so it is close to the gradient of warm to cold sea surface temperatures, but it's not there yet. But it is still gradually weakening as it is dealing with some dry air and some shear. You can see the south side of the system is very bare of any clouds, especially in the far southern side near Bermuda. But especially just south of the eye, you can see the center is actually exposed a little bit there, just due to the shear and some of the dry air. But this is still a hurricane, has winds of about 80 miles per hour, estimated by the National Hurricane Center, and this is still a strong storm. And there is still that potential that the system remains a hurricane-force storm as it comes north here. And as usual, we have hurricane watches in place for portions of Nova Scotia. This is the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. You can see all the tropical storm warnings in blue. Bermuda's still in one that will probably get discontinued later today, but you can see tropical storm warning from about the coastline of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, through areas like Nantucket and Cape Cod, through Boston, along all the way up the coastline of Maine. Important note for the eastern coast of Maine, the hurricane watch has been discontinued, and you can see a tropical storm watch extending all the way into portions of New Brunswick and all the way, including areas like Halifax, and all the way into eastern Nova Scotia, with a hurricane watch in place for a lot of those areas there in pink that you can see on this map. But you can also see just how expansive Lee's wind field is. It's very big, and we told you that this would happen. And even though this system's center is going to likely stay far, far away from areas like Boston and Cape Cod, this tropical storm force wind field will still likely come ashore, and we will also see with that the potential for storm surge flooding. Now, because the system is further away than forecast a couple of days ago, the peak surge, especially in Cape Cod and Nantucket, has been down to about 1 to 3 feet, and because of that, the storm surge watch was discontinued yesterday. This is still a significant surge, so make sure you're staying away from the water. And if you see any rising water along the coastline, don't go towards it. And if you're driving along the road along the coastline and you see water on the road, don't drive over it. it's a typical saying, turn around, don't drown, as the power of water is not something to underestimate. But you can see 1 to 3 feet is possible here from really the U.S.-Canada border, from Maine all the way down to the coastline of Rhode Island and even northern Long Island. And southern Long Island, you're not really going to be getting much of an onshore push, but there might be a period of time where you do have a little bit of an onshore push, and you could get 1 to 2 feet of surge from that as the system pushes further north. Now, in terms of rainfall, this rainfall forecast remains fairly the same as yesterday. You can see the most significant rain will be west of the center. You can see that if the center is tracking here into Nova Scotia, all the heavy rain is north and west of the center, and you can see a general swath of 2 to 4 inches of rain is expected here, and the most significant totals may be in Maine and portions of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And there could be some localized areas. You can see some yellow here of 4 to 6 inches, and a lot of this could come down pretty quickly, so we could see some flash flooding issues, and because of that, the Weather Prediction Center has issued an elevated slight risk of rainfall this weekend for eastern Maine. But that's it for Lee. Stay safe in Atlantic Canada and the Northeast as the system passes through. Next week, it'll be gone, and we can return to normal things, especially in the weather scene. But of course, as things go in peak hurricane season, once we get rid of one storm, we've got another storm to talk about, and that we do have a case of that. We have Tropical Depression 15. This formed earlier this morning across the tropical Atlantic, and this used to be Invest 97 and 98L. It was kind of confusing which one became dominant, but 97L was the one that became dominant, and this system is now formed, and this likely is going to become our next major hurricane in the Atlantic, as conditions do look pretty favorable ahead of the storm. Now, this is a close-up visible loop. You can see the system center is not overall the best defined, certainly not the best that I've seen, but I suppose you could call it a tropical depression, as it does have what appears to be a closed low-level center with some disorganized thunderstorm activity around it. The thunderstorm activity is really not organized at all around this system. You can see a couple bursts here and there, but this system is struggling a little bit right now. But tropical depressions, when they first form, they typically do struggle a little bit at first, but given conditions ahead of the storm that models are depicting, I wouldn't be surprised to see this system certainly become a Category 3 hurricane, and that is certainly what is forecast by the National Hurricane Center. So this is some of the modeling. This is by day 5. Now, I'm mainly going to be showing day 5 for these runs, and I think day 3 as well on another frame that I have, because there is a bit of uncertainty between the GFS and the European models on exactly how the system will track and how fast or slow it will be. So this is day 5 on the GFS. You can see we have the hurricane sitting just east of Bermuda. That would be a good scenario. We don't have a hurricane directly coming for Bermuda. But if we look at the European by day 5, we have a much different scene. We have rather a hurricane east of Bermuda. Now it's southeast of Bermuda, and this still leaves potentially a door open for a track that could get it pretty close to the island later down the line. Now, I've looked to see what is causing this difference in the timing between these two, because this is a significant difference between both of these models. From what I can tell, it's within the 200 millibar flow. This is the 200 millibar flow chart from the GFS, and note primarily this ridge that is set up north of the storm. This is by day 3 on the model. Note that this is placed north of the storm, so you have more easterlies placed north of 15, and in turn you get stronger flow aloft, and I can show you that in a sounding. You can see the low level flow is a bit weak. The upper level flow is stronger. This nets a stronger steering flow and allows the system to track a little bit stronger. Alongside that, it causes a little bit of shear because you have the weaker flow here and more strong flow here. This causes more speed shear throughout the troposphere, and that can impact the system in a negative way. Now, if we look at the European, note that the upper level pattern, this is the same day. This is Monday morning or late Sunday night, day 3 on the model. We don't really have the ridge centered north of the system. It's more placed directly over the system. This would be a more favorable look for significant intensification, but also because you don't have that the ridge putting those easterlies aloft, you have generally a weaker flow aloft. And you can see that here. There's not nearly as strong of winds on the European aloft compared to the GFS. This means that the system is going to track slower on the run, but also this does not mean there's nearly as much shear. You can see the shear here is about 5 knots, where the GFS had about, I think it was about 16 or 17 knots of shear, which that would have been a significant shear, and that could potentially disrupt the system from intensifying significantly, whereas this shear value would potentially allow more intensification, and that could allow us to get to a pretty strong hurricane. In fact, at times I've seen on this European run that it's been having shear values near 0 knots, very, very low. And that could allow us to have yet another very strong storm. But if the GFS does verify, may have to put some of that into question to see exactly how it interacts with that shear. Now, the GFS does have, in its ensembles, it does have some members showing this possibility like the European is showing. You can see in the general spread, we've got a general envelope here by day 5 east of Bermuda, where we have solutions similar to the GFS that are faster and more east, and solutions like the European to where they're further south, slower, potentially stronger, and southeast of Bermuda. And same case with the European. It has tracks by day 5, more so similar to the GFS, and more so similar to the parent run. Now, it is more leaning towards the parent run in this on the ensemble approach, but you get the general picture that both models are seeing both solutions that I showed you there. And this is just something to watch, and we'll have to exactly see how this pattern evolves over the coming days. The National Hurricane Center has sort of taken a middle ground approach between these two, and you can see that generally here with a track over the next several days up towards Wednesday of next week, generally approaching Bermuda from the southeast. Now, exactly where does this track after this point? Does it recurve east of the island, or does it perhaps try and recurve a little bit closer to the island? Now, the general consensus is, towards day 5 that this system will eventually recurve, and I can show you that on the 500 millibar flow chart. Reason being is that we have some troughing left behind from Lee, one of the troughs that's going to pick it up and carry it further north into Atlantic Canada. That's going to sit over the U.S. over the coming days, and the remnants of that will still be around, it looks like, on at least from what the models like the GFS and the European are suggesting here. And that creates a weakness between these two ridges, and you get a general pattern to carry the system out to sea. And you can see on the European, if I go back to the OZ run, you can see that general recurvature pattern. But because it was further south and a bit slower, that trough is a little bit less prevalent on this run, and this ridge was able to come a little bit further west, so the general pattern has the storm recurving closer to Bermuda. So for those in Bermuda, I know you just got done with Lee, but you need to watch this system just over the next week as it tracks through the Central Atlantic, and stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center and the Bermuda Weather Service for the latest information on that. But you can also see their intensity forecasts here with a general intensification trend here with a major hurricane forecast by next Tuesday and next Wednesday, with a peak intensity, I believe it's on Tuesday, of about 120 miles per hour. Now, that could go a little bit higher, could go a little bit lower, we'll have to see, but there is pretty high confidence that we may have another significant hurricane here. And keep in mind, for interest in the Caribbean and the United States, it's like with Lee, even if this system, in all likelihood, as it recurves, as it stays strong, we will likely have some surf impacts impacting us along our coastlines. So make sure you stay tuned to local weather offices for information on that. But that's it for the Atlantic. Just a quick summary. Lee is coming further north and will be impacting Atlantic Canada and the Northeast this weekend. Margot is sitting out here west of the Azores, will likely just meander around here over the next week. Could come towards the Azores next week as a non-tropical system, but there's still some uncertainty on the track. And TD15 has formed today, likely to become a major hurricane in the Central Atlantic and may pose a threat to Bermuda. But stay safe in Atlantic Canada as Lee pushes through, and hopefully the impacts are not nearly as bad as we were forecasting here. But the good news is it's nothing like past storms that have been racing up there as strong hurricanes. Similar to last year, an example would be Fiona of last year. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.